So now that we got our CPU, our motherboard, our video card, our case, I'm going to go to the next step here, which is buying my memory, so my RAM for this. And I'm not somebody that spends a ton of time selecting different types of RAM. I'm usually looking at, okay, what's kind of my best bang for my buck here. So I'm looking at, okay, how much RAM do I want? And what you'll find with RAM is you don't often get individual sticks. You get dual channel sticks. You get sold in pairs. So if you wanted to buy 16 gigs of RAM, they'd come in 8 sticks. And one of the reasons for that is the way that your motherboard is put together. You often have those dual channel lanes. So it's actually more effective. It's faster if you have the two put in. So if I have 1.8 and 1.8, than if I just had 1.16. And you can think of it almost like a bus kind of transporting people. If you have one bus that can carry 32 people, for 32 people to get on a bus, 32 people to get off a bus, that takes a bit of time. If you have two buses that can only carry 16 people, it's easier for both buses to load at the same time and then get off 16 people on each, 16 people at the same time and move. So even though your memory size is the same, you'll often find that sold in the dual channel there just for the way that kind of the computers and motherboards are all put together. The RAM speed does need to match to your motherboard. You need to match the certain type. For all of this, if you're buying a new one, it's basically going to be DDR4. But if you had an older model motherboard you were using, you can't match DDR4 into a DDR3 motherboard. That needs to match as well there. Beyond that, it's just looks. Okay, and what you're kind of looking for here. This one is nice on PC Part Picker where they talk about the price per gigabyte. Okay, and you can take a look at what's kind of effective from there. But other than kind of the amount and a little bit on the speed, that's all you really have to make sure that matches. And once again, the speed on here, the RAM speed, is going to have a bit of higher performance for the faster RAM speed, though it's not going to be the life and death of things at the end of the day here. Okay. Next up, I've got my storage. So my storage is going to be my hard drive or my SSD here. And just as a bit of a review, we've got 3 different kind of hard drive choices to choose from. This is our older type HDD, which is really, we got a spinning disk in there. So cheap. You can hold lots, like the amount you get is pretty substantial for how much you're paying. So you can get terabytes or multiple terabytes up to, I think, even 8 terabytes or more per HDD pretty cheaply nowadays, especially compared to our other types here. So we've got 2 types of SSD. This was our traditional SSD for a long time. This is our smaller NVMe. You have to make sure your motherboard supports this. The newer ones are pretty well all going to support this. And you've got a bit more bang for your buck over here. The difference between the SSD, the traditional kind of type here, and the NVMe isn't as substantial as the difference between the HDD and SSD, if that makes sense. So for sure, you want to get this stuff, your SSD, either one of these, for a new build. Okay, because otherwise you're going to get this brand new CPU, you're going to get a really good graphics card, and you're going to be bottlenecked using your HDD. Now, if you want to get a secondary HDD for additional storage, say you've got a lot of videos, photos, things like that, and you don't want to pay a high price for the SSDs, this is a great kind of purchase that way. But for your primary, your operating system, what you're loading on is your main programs, maybe some of your games there, you want it on your SSD there. So if we go back here, we can see this is where it can get a bit confusing, because you might go, hey, this is 2 terabytes for $55. This is only half a gig, or half a terabyte, 500 gigs for double the price. So of course I'm going to choose this, but that's that HDD and that's that spinning. So any type that's got an RPMs there, I think that's for the spinning disk inside, right? We've got our SSDs, say for the Samsung Evos. I think they were just on sale here. That's probably why they're pretty popular. That form factor is the size they fit into. That's that M2. right? That other size was that 2.5 inch. So comparatively pretty similar if I'm looking at these two. So one's the Samsung 97 Evo for 180 for a terabyte. This is 163. So a slight bit cheaper for the 2.5 inch compared to the NVMe. So when you're picking out your memory size, your storage size, I guess I should say, definitely go with the SSD. And if you're going to do an M2, make sure that the motherboard you selected earlier in their description has a space for an M2 slot there. So we don't have a lot of stuff left. We have our power supply. And up here we have an estimated wattage. I do find sometimes that can be a bit off from PC Part Picker. So I'll show you what I do when I'm looking at different power supplies. If I go to either the manufacturer or one of the purchasers' websites, often they'll have it listed kind of under system requirements, what they recommend for most users, what a regular kind of power supply would be for this. You can also Google it, recommended power supply for whichever model I ended up purchasing. There's a lot of websites that are devoted to things like this. And they'll compare different models, how much power they're required for this, what their recommendations are. Also, like the manufacturers is kind of a really good way to kind of see what their suggestion is. So on this one, we've got minimum 650 watts, one 6-pin, one 8-pin PCI Express power connectors. So kind of any power supply you get over that is basically going to have two 8-pin connectors on there. But you can run into some issues if you're not kind of careful, you're not looking at those things. So I know that I need, on the website was recommended 550. The manufacturer website recommended 650. I'm going to choose at least something with 650 watts. And that way, if I have additional things like another hard drive that ends up getting plugged in, optical drives, I'll be more than fine. The efficiency ratings, kind of the gold, bronze, talk about kind of loss in your power, that no power supply is running at that full kind of power the entire time. So it's just an efficiency rating for how that's doing, and the gold is going to be a bit more efficient for the amount of power that it's using and not wasting compared to the bronze there. So you can take a look at any of those, but as long as you, I think you can go by minimum wattage here. So if I go something along with 650, I can see any that I'm looking for here, and there's some reviews online. Buying kind of popular ones with good reviews is a pretty standard way to do that there. The other one that I have is you can choose if you want a modular power supply, semi-modular, or just a regular kind of standard one. So this would be an example of a modular power supply where you can include a lot of pictures in there to see, or sorry, your cables. You can disconnect your cables and keep it a bit cleaner than if you didn't have this option. If you were only, I'll see if the next one up here, find one of these. These are all modular. So if I find one that's not, for instance, it's got kind of all of them coming out in one there. So that's a bit of a choice that you want to make for what I'm picking. You can even get those semi-modular ones. So they've got, for instance, the ones that are you're for sure going to have to use, like the motherboard and the CPU, and the rest are kind of optional. So they're a nice kind of mid-ground between them. So I've got my CPU, I've got my motherboard, memory, storage, video card case, power supply. Everything else is kind of optional at this point, depending on what you require for your system. Do you require an operating system, a Windows 10, a monitor? Do you want any extra storage? Do you want to put a bit of a CPU cooler on that CPU because you're going to overclock it? It's going to generate a lot more heat. You want it to run a little more efficiently there. So anything past kind of the base points is dependent on your setup from there. But this would be kind of what I'm looking at. Okay, what is your total here? So we're just over $1,000. And what are the model numbers? And if you want to include the link from the PC part picker here, your kind of list, you can do that for me as well as part of your assignment. So ask me any questions. Let me know if you get stuck. And hopefully this helps a bit when you're picking.